So, welcome everyone to our Food for Thought speaker series. Today, we're honored to have Milena Gomez, who is a lecturer and visiting research scholar in ATSIPA, and she's going to be discussing Venezuelan refugees and in Colombia and the COVID-19 crisis. So, just a quick note, if you have questions, we'll leave it towards the end. You can put questions in the chat, or you could raise your hand using the participants tab. And as always, if you could please keep yourselves on mute unless you're asking a question, and we'll call on you in the Q&A session. So now I'll hand it off to Bill for the intro. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, Jeremy and Valerie, again, for keeping this wonderful session going. It's something I look forward to every week, and I know we've had a number of the people on the call back again and again and again. So that's really wonderful. Where just every week we have such wonderful speakers, and this week is no exception. Milena Gomez has been a good personal friend, really a family member, not just of me and my family, but the whole Picker family. Many of you may not know that when I went to the FDNY and took a leave, Milena basically replaced me and became the assistant director of the Picker Center for several years. And she has her PhD from Colombia. And in fact, Milena and I met way back in 1994 and 95 when we started a joint program with the Externado in Bogota, which continued all the way through before the pandemic changed the whole world. So we've known her for a very long time. She's been a great friend, and she was a dean of the International Affairs program at the Externado. She was assistant director of the Picker Center. She has a significant family businesses in real estate and in dairy, where she served as an executive, and she has been in the Colombian government as the number 2 person in the embassy in Turkey, and beginning with her PhD thesis, which I had the honor to be a member of her dissertation committee. She has slowly but surely became one of the world's experts in diaspora and immigration and the public policies that result. And certainly when she was in Turkey, she had extensive real world experience with what was happening in the region, particularly in terms of Syria. And I hope you've read her paper. If you haven't, perhaps the most secret, explosive immigration, both in terms of numbers and in consequence, is the somewhat hidden movement of people out of Venezuela over the last almost decade now. So that's what she's going to talk about with us today. Milena, thank you so much for joining us, and we really look forward to your presentation.
Bill, thank you for that generous introduction, and I'm thrilled to be here back at the Picker Center. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Valerie and Jeremy, for inviting me. And thank you all for joining us today. I think I'm going to share, I have a PowerPoint presentation to share with you. So I'll share it and then talk to everybody once I have it up on screen. Oh. Okay, I've done it. Okay. Okay. So I don't have that much time. I've been told that I can talk to you for about 30 minutes. So I'm going to divide the presentation in 2. First, I'm going to talk about, give you a background for all of you CEPA students who don't really know why Venezuelans are in Colombia, why, when they arrive, what they're doing, how long they're going to stay. I'm going to try to I'll give you an ABC of what's going on in Colombia. And the second part, I'm going to address the issue of how the COVID crisis has affected migrants and refugees, Venezuelan migrants and refugees in Colombia. So starting with the basics, how many Venezuelans are living abroad? The OAS estimated at the beginning of this year that over 5 million Venezuelans have left their country. As you can see, Colombia, according to the OAS, has been hosting the largest number with 1,600,000 Venezuelans living in Colombia. This represents 33% of the Venezuela population, the Venezuelan migrant population. And in terms for Colombia, it represents 3.6% of our population. As you can see, Venezuelans live in other countries, neighboring countries, United States and Spain too. But if you've been reading The Economist lately, you've probably seen that they estimate over 2 million Venezuelans living in Colombia. And I think I would agree with The Economist, because many of the Venezuelans who are returning to my country actually have dual nationalities. So Colombians that left Colombia in the 60s, 70s, and 80s have been living in Venezuela, and now they're coming back home. So they don't get counted in these figures because they have Colombian IDs and are seen as Colombians. So when did the Venezuelans start arriving to Colombia? This is my take. I've divided the arrival of Venezuelans in two distinct periods. The first wave of immigrants arrived from 2010 to 2014, and I've called them the executive immigrants, basically copying or the Venezuelan press. That's how they labeled this group of highly qualified Venezuelans leaving the country. They were the wealthy, the educated, and they left Venezuela in 2010 to 2014, basically fleeing the policies of Hugo Chavez. I worked in 2012 with a group of students from the Diplomatic Academy, and we interviewed many of these executive immigrants that arrived to Colombia. And a large number of them arrived to Colombia thinking that they were just coming to my country on a temporary basis. They did not want to stay for such a long term. And I remember interviewing one who was still working in Caracas, and he sent his family, his children, his wife to live in Bogota because they felt safer in Colombia than they were in Caracas. He would commute. He'd work in Caracas during the weekdays and be with his family back home, back in Bogota during the weekend. So that was something that happened back then. Another case, many Venezuelan businessmen invested in Colombia. I remember interviewing a businessman who had an export business in Caracas, in Maracaibo, and he built and exported dinghy boats. But he told us back then that it had become increasingly difficult to export because of bureaucratic constraints in Caracas, in Venezuela, and because it was impossible to find the materials to build his dinghy boats. So what he did was he imported his factory and brought it to Colombia, to the Colombian coast next to Barranquilla, and he's been doing well since, exporting from Colombia. Another big investment for those of you who are Colombians who are listening to me, that you probably know that Farmatodo, which is a huge many drugstores that are all over the country, was a Venezuelan investment. The Venezuelans brought the concept of the American modern drugstore, CVS type, to Colombia, and Farmatodos are Venezuelan investments and have been doing very well. A lot has been written about the former employees of PDVSA, the oil giant in Venezuela, that lost their jobs, were laid off by the Chavez government, and many arrived to Colombia and have helped or jump-started our national oil industry. So I worked in Colombia for many years in the universities, and back then I met many academics from Venezuela. They came and worked in Colombia. And I also met many students. There was a huge exodus of the academic sector arriving to Colombia. So the point that I wanted to mention is that this first wave of migrants arriving from Venezuela were a group of highly skilled executives, highly skilled professionals that arrived to Colombia during that period. And that's why in 1220, we all joked in Colombia that one of the best things that happened to Colombia was Chavez, because we benefited from the arrival of these migrants from Venezuela. Starting in 2015, it was a whole different story. I mentioned no es vivir sino sobrevivir. It's not to live, it's just to survive. I used that as a quote to refer to this second wave of migration from Venezuela. Here we're talking about poor people that arrived to Colombia, as they did to the other neighboring countries. The situation in Venezuela had deteriorated greatly, and people lacked basic necessities such as food, health services. They were also fleeing insecurity. The situation in Venezuela had gotten very complicated. They left hoping to find a new life, a new future in Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Chile, Costa Rica, and Panama. Just to give you an idea, the numbers have grown exponentially from 2015, approximately 140,000 to over 2 million nowadays. So that's also, there's been changes in the last 4 or 5 years. When Venezuelans arrived to Colombia in 2015, during the second wave of migration, they all settled near the border. They settled on the coast of Colombia. Now, in the past 4 years, they have been moving all over the country. 68% live all over the country because they've been finding jobs in cities. So most of them live in urban areas, which has obviously policy implications for the governments of these cities. So what has happened with the COVID-19 since March of this year? Obviously, the country has been shattered by the virus and has confronted several challenges. I do want to mention that the government has done an enormous effort to impose strict lockdowns in order to contain the virus. At the very beginning, that was the case, and I can just give you an example, my personal example. I flew in from Madrid, Spain on March 6th to New York. I was one of those Europeans that Cuomo mentioned that came to New York and infected the population. When I arrived on March 6th, I was welcomed in the JFK airport and had no issues coming in. A cousin of mine who was flying in from Madrid to Bogota was immediately put on lockdown. And when she first told me that she had to stay in quarantine for 14 days at home, you know, I was like totally shocked. We had no idea that we were in Madrid living in the middle of where the virus was alive and kicking. So Colombia was very, very strict. And I give credit to Claudia Lopez, a former CEPA student who is our mayor, for imposing a strict lockdown on the city. But in spite of this strict lockdown, the virus hit the country and the city with a vengeance. So the situation has been very complicated in Colombia, and particularly in the cities. As you can see from the slide, last weekend, we reached a very unfortunate milestone with 1 million confirmed COVID cases. and over 30,000 deaths. So Colombia is third in Latin America with the number of deaths after Brazil and Argentina. So how did COVID-19 hurt the Colombian economy? I've jotted down a few numbers just to give you an idea. Economic activity shrunk by 15.7. We were looking to a very good productive year this year, but we unfortunately were affected by the virus. Unemployment, according to the DANE, which is the Department of Statistics, said it had reached 21%, and the women were worse off than in terms of unemployment. The IMF estimated that the economy will shrink 7.8 this year. And this is a really sad development considering that the government was counting on a very productive 2020, reaching levels of 4%, one of the highest in Latin America. The IMF has estimated that GDP, will shrink 7.8, Desarrollo estimated that poverty levels will increase by 15%, which means that 5.5 million people more people will live in poverty this year. And this is erasing the gains that the country had been able to obtain in the last decade. So this is very sad news for the country. And obviously, there was the negative effects of public health that have affected Colombia and other countries as well. So what happened to the Venezuelans living in Colombia? As you can imagine, thousands lost their livelihood, and then the Venezuelan community were more affected than I think than most because of their very difficult situation. In terms of employment, 46% of the Venezuelan workforce are independent. There are people who had small businesses, and many lost this livelihood. 47% work in the service and commerce sector, which means they were waiters, they worked in hotels. Many in Colombia worked for Rappi, which for you who haven't been to Colombia, Rappi is a delivery service similar to Postmates here in the States, in New York. And they were the only ones that were able, because of the situation, were able to keep their jobs. So many of the waiters lost their jobs because all the restaurants were closed in Colombia, and everybody tried to get a job with Rappi, one of the few jobs that are available for the Venezuelan workers. 12%, according to the IDP, 12% of the Venezuelans work in the construction sector. This was a business that was paralyzed during 3 months. Now they're back at work, but they were also negatively affected. So it was bad enough to lose a job, but those who were working, 64% of the workers earned less than minimum salary. So it just gives you an idea of the situation that many Venezuelans have to live in Colombia. Now, a daunting 57% of the Venezuelan population are undocumented. This has repercussions, as it means that many lack health insurance and are not able during the COVID times to get necessary health service. But what impresses me about the Colombian government is that they have done an amazing job trying to get the Venezuelans documented, to give them papers. I remember talking to high-level officials 3 years ago, and they said that it was very important for Colombia that the Venezuelans have papers, and they were allowing Venezuelans to get papers, which are called PEP, Permiso Especial Permanente, permanent special permit, if they had a government issued ID from Venezuela. So Venezuelans could get papers by presenting a passport or a driver's license or any other legal ID. That was the situation 3 years ago. Because so many Venezuelans were asking for the PEP, it became, the government of Colombia was overwhelmed. So for a few years, they stopped issuing PEPs, but they've returned during COVID. And I understand that now Venezuelans can ask for a PEP, a permiso, a permit to work, if they can hand even an expired document, because many of the Venezuelans have been in Colombia for 3-4 years, so their documents have all expired. The Colombian government has allowed them to receive a PEP if they provide expired IDs. And even now, in the past 2 weeks, I've heard that if you have a job, you will be able to receive permission. So anybody who can find a job can work in Colombia with papers. And this is very important for many. I remember interviewing Venezuelans 2 years ago for my businesses. They had no papers, and unfortunately I couldn't back then give them a job because it would have a lot of legal implications. But now if they had a paper from any company, they could acquire a PEP and be able to work legally in Colombia. Now, another problem that the Venezuelans confront in Colombia is that they've been evicted from their homes. And according to the IDB, 32% are without access to housing. So what's the answer that the Venezuelans had confronted with this crisis of COVID? In their anguish and their misery, many opted to return to Venezuela. According to the press, over 100,000 Venezuelans have returned to their country in the past months. They have struggled to return to Venezuela in the middle of a lockdown among, the biggest crisis of COVID. And the lucky ones were able to get on humanitarian flights provided by the Colombian government, and the less lucky had to walk by foot all the way back to Venezuela because they're so poor they can't afford even a bus service. So to give you an idea, Bogota to Cucuta is 345 miles away. So what does that imply? That if you take a car, it will take you 12 hours to drive from Bogota to Cucuta. For these people who are walking, they will take 10 days to walk to Cucuta, walking 12 hours a day. So just imagine the complication. And it's like for us from New York, we'd be walking to Pittsburgh, just to give you an idea. And you also bear in mind that many of these migrants don't live in Bogota. Many live in Pasto or Cali, miles away. And some are even walking all the way from Peru and Ecuador. But it's just one of the most, I think, telling stories about the suffering of these Venezuelans. Once they arrive to Venezuela, they're confronted with other problems, other roadblocks. One issue is the border is closed, so they have difficulty crossing the border. And the Colombian Maduro cut off relations with the Colombian government in February of last year. And since then, we've had no diplomatic contacts or ties between the two governments. So what the border authorities have done, they reached an agreement between each other to allow pasos fronterizos, or border entries for a few number of Venezuelans wanting to go back home. That, however, has a quota. No more than 300 Venezuelans can cross the border daily. And so many cannot go and have to remain patiently on the border of Colombia, waiting to get permission to cross legally on their way back to Venezuela. So what other migrants try to do, they use what we call las trochas, which are sort of hidden pathways all over the border between Colombia and Venezuela. From the Guajira, Santander del Norte, and Arauca, there are over 500 trochas where the migrants try to cross down these pathways. The problem is that these trochas are controlled by different groups of the different guerrilla groups, the ELN, the EPL, the FARC. I've heard also that some of the Clan del Golfo, some of the trochas are controlled by the Clan del Golfo, which are drug lords. And also that some of them are controlled by the Guardia Nacional de Venezuela. So what happens? That the migrants are charged a fee to use the trochas belonging to these thugs. So the fee that they have to pay is like $5,000, 5,000 pesos, which might not seem like a lot of money to you and me. That's $1.30 per person. But for Venezuelans working in Venezuela who earn $2 a month, that's a lot of money. So these are some of the difficulties the Venezuelans have on returning back home. Now, the other problem that they've confronted is that they're not welcomed by the Maduro government back home. So they have been accused by the government as being traitors because they were the ones that left Venezuela years ago and are considered traitors by the Maduro government. Others, the government has also accused them of importing the virus, of being infected, and they don't want them to come back to Venezuela and infect the population. And also some of them have been accused of being criminals. So imagine the difficulty for many to return home. And once the few that are able to cross then have to go into quarantine. So you can imagine the awful conditions that they have to live in quarantine on the border. So the Venezuelans have struggled hard to get back home. These are some pictures that I wanted to share with you, pictures that I borrowed from El Tiempo. Initially I'd wanted to go to the border and interview and take pictures this summer, but because of the lockdown in Colombia, I wasn't able to travel. So I'm sharing you pictures from El Tiempo. These are those caminantes that you see all over the countryside and the roads, people walking back to Venezuela, people hitchhiking a ride back home. But imagine how many people are gonna pick you up during the COVID days. I doubt people are willing to pick up strangers in their cars. Pictures from El Tiempo showing migrants on buses, sleeping wherever they can sleep. Most of them sleep on the sidewalks or near the highways. Now, this is an interesting picture. As you can see, usually we were used to seeing the migrants coming from Venezuela to Colombia. But here you have them walking back to Venezuela. As you can see from the sign, it says República Bolivariana de Venezuela. So it's crazy. It's good to see so many going back because their life is so miserable in Colombia that they'd rather be back home. Now, the next picture will surprise you because I belong to a WhatsApp chat with academics in Colombia studying the Venezuela issue. And these were taken by some academics on the border. And these are Venezuelan migrants coming back to Colombia. So now many found the situation so complicated in Venezuela that now they're trying to come back to Colombia. And El Tiempo estimates that for every migrant that left Colombia, 2 will be returning back to Colombia. The pictures, the pictures were taken outside of Pamplona. So And the situation is complicated that in the WhatsApp chat, I've been informed that even last week in Pamplona, there were about 600 migrants from Venezuela arriving to this small town near Cucuta every day. And 50% of those migrants were children. And the city of Pamplona is having difficulty handling the arrival of the migrants back to their town. So imagine if this is just in Pamplona, you can imagine what's going on in the rest of the other cities. So, you know, it's a very unique situation. I would say crazy in the sense that people are going back and forth, and because they're leaving one hell for another hell. And I do not want to say that living in Colombia or Venezuela is a hell, but the cycle of poverty that they live in it makes it so difficult for them to survive. So analysts predict that over 200,000 Venezuelans will return to Colombia at this moment. At the beginning of this year, the OAS estimated that over 7 million or 7.5 million of Venezuelans will be living abroad. This, they said, by the end of this year. So the flows have grown. And if that happens, it would represent that Venezuelan refugees and migrants will be one of the largest groups of migrants in the world, second only to the Syrians. So what I really wanted to do in this brief talk was highlight the plight of the Venezuelans, not just in Colombia, but in the neighboring countries too. And unfortunately, at times, as Bill mentioned at the beginning of the conference, that the plight of Venezuelans, they seem to be invisible, especially in global policy circles. People do not address the needs of Venezuelans, and it's a growing bombshell. I mean, it will get more and more complicated. And I don't know if you have questions for me at this moment or that I can ask.
Milena, that was incredible.
Thank you, Bill.
Is the UN anywhere to be found in this situation?
Well, the UNDP has offices in Bogota, and they have people working with the Venezuelan situation. The problem is something of funding, because you know the UN and the Organización Internacional de Migraciones, the International Migration Office, are all helping, but they don't. Venezuelan is not such a priority for these institutions as other areas of the world. One issue, Bill, is the issue of money. The Venezuelans don't receive, you know, the Venezuelan migrants don't receive the same amount of financial help that other refugees do. Just to give you an idea, for every Venezuelan living abroad, every Venezuelan receives $50 versus the Syrian refugees that receive $5,000, because other refugees have help from other sources. So Colombia is surviving with very little funds. But the UNDP does advise the Colombian government, and the Colombian government, out of they have an office that's directly gerencia, management of migration. Venezuela, started by the Santos government, has done an incredible job doing, you know, as much as they can to help the refugees in Colombia.
Are there any philanthropists who have taken up, you know, the Buffett Foundation, the Gates Foundation? None of them have, this remains hidden to them as well?
Not that I know of. There are many NGOs, Colombian NGOs, that are working, religious institutions, children's NGOs, that are working, but the issue is that they don't really have the money. The church, the Catholic Church, has tried to do as much, and they take in migrants and help them out, and many try to feed them. The Colombian does an amazing job because they also offer education and health services to the Venezuelans that are in Colombia. About 190,000 children go to schools in Colombia, and this has enormous policy implications for the government. All Venezuelans can receive health if they go to, well, not all, but maybe for emergency assistance, they can receive help. Over 125,000 children have been born from Venezuelan mothers. So the government has tried to help as much as they can. I think something that's worth noting was that last year, the Duque government offered citizenship to 25,000 Venezuelan children who were born in Colombia and who were in limbo because they couldn't get their Venezuelan paperwork and they weren't Colombian. But I think this was an important step, giving them citizenship.
I have a question, and just want to say, if anyone else has questions, you could raise your hand in the participants tab or put it in the chat. So when it comes to, you mentioned the two waves of immigrants, and I was curious about the executive immigrants in Colombia. Those people who are going back, you described that those people are is that a good subset to describe the people who are leaving? Is the second wave? Or
the second one, they're the poor, the people that have had difficulty adapting to life in Colombia. The interesting thing, the executive immigrants that arrived at the very beginning during the first flow, as I said in my presentation, they thought their visit to Colombia would be temporary, and they couldn't wait for Chavez to leave so they could go back home. But they're still in Colombia. I have friends who have just given up on being able, 10 years have gone by, and they have homes. They, some have even built country homes, and they have businesses. They're doing well. They're grateful to be in Colombia. They feel safe in Colombia, which security is a big issue. I think I was surprised when I interviewed the Venezuelans back in 2012 that they said that they didn't feel that they felt safe in Colombia. And we've always thought that Colombia was very dangerous. So we thought, oh my God, if they think they're safe in Colombia, but they would tell us that in Venezuela, they would steal your wallet. In Colombia, they'd steal your wallet, but in Colombia, they'd let you live. In Venezuela, they would kill you for stealing the wallet. So they, I think they're happy to be in Colombia, and they're doing well. The elite, and unfortunately, the poor have suffered a lot under COVID.
Melinda, do you think some of the lack of assistance is because a lot of these international organizations and other governments don't want to, quote unquote, bail out the government in Venezuela? So it's part of a, not advertised political strategy to make things so bad in Venezuela that the people revolt and overthrow the government?
I think we're not on their priority. I mean, I think the U.S. has been a donor, and they have given 60% of the donations are from the U.S., but the U.S. doesn't see it as a problem. It's not affecting their doorstep. It's foreign to them. In the Syrians in Turkey got much more help because the European Union outsourced their problem and sent it to the Turks. In Colombia, it's not really a problem for the US because the people are so poor, so miserable that they're not going to be able to get to cross the border in Mexico. The European Union about 2 weeks ago announced that they were offering 50 million euros, which is a lot of money, but it was basically for human trafficking. And they have helped, a year ago, they also offered 30 million euros when Federica Mogherini, the High Commissioner, visited the country, and that's a lot of money. But in terms of the crisis, it's not really that much when you're talking about billions of dollars that the Syrian refugees have. It's not enough.
When it comes to the first wave that you described in 2010, I was curious about what was the impetus for that, because I know you said that they felt like the Chavez government wasn't functioning correctly, and you'd say like economic distress, but is that somehow linked to the drop in oil prices and the commodities cost?
The economy, but back, it was a bit of everything, but many of them just thought they left for Colombia, they left for Costa Rica, Panama, Western Florida is a huge concentration of Venezuelans. Basically, they didn't feel safe in Venezuela, and they as I said, one of the businessmen couldn't survive economically with his business. So people, when situation gets tough, you find a way to get out, and you try a new life with the hope of find prosperity. And some people came to Colombia, choosing Colombia over the United States, the very wealthy, because they said that in the United States they'd be taxed, and they felt that Colombia was a place near Venezuela that they could stay for a few years and not be overtaxed by the US government. So everybody had a different reason of why they left.
May I say something, Professor Gomez? There was a time before too that Venezuelan opened its doors to Colombia, Argentina, and Peru. So to me, there's I feel like they're also returning the favor in a way. That's what it sounds like to me a bit.
Yeah, that's so right. In the 60s and 70s, we Colombians went to Venezuela. Venezuela has always had a very open-minded immigration policy, much more open than any other country in the Andean countries. So, that's why you find many Italians and Spanish and Portuguese in Venezuela. And Colombians were part of that group, because Venezuela, as I think I said in my paper, was a rich cousin. And so many Colombians who were lower income found jobs in Venezuela. And they arrived as, maids, service gardeners, drivers. And I think that's something that the government can't forget, that Venezuela was generous with us too. So that's a very good point.
Milena, years ago, you did a lot of writing about remittances and how people who were in diasporas around the world would send significant amount of money back home. Have you been able to do any research about how much money is coming into Venezuela from people who are away? Is that?
I don't know I don't know the number now, but I know many families survive on the money, on the remittances that they receive. But I know that many go to Colombia to receive the remittances before the border was closed. It was interesting that the Venezuelans who lived on the border would go and receive their remittance monies in Cucuta on the Colombian coast, because they'd be able to have dollars and buy all sorts of goods and medicines and then go back to Venezuela, versus getting the money in Venezuela and then the money disappears because of the devaluation of the Bolivar.
Yeah. Very complicated situation, very sad situation. Do you see any optimism down the line? Do you think that if there's a vaccine for COVID, do you think that will normalize the situation at all? Will people be more likely to stay put, or is COVID just making a bad situation worse, but it'll still be bad when COVID goes away?
It doesn't look like it's going to get better. until there's a regime change, and the government of Colombia, with the help of the U.S. and the whole they've been incapable of changing, of affecting change in Venezuela. So I'm not very optimistic. I think Trump tried to work with the Colombian government to see if they could impose their leader Guaido, and nothing. They've been told they haven't been successful in the least. 50% of the Venezuelan population supports Maduro. So I think the situation is I'm not very optimistic that the situation will improve in the least. Especially with the crisis in oil prices. That doesn't
right. But even if oil went up, my understanding is the infrastructure is deteriorated in Venezuela. So getting any kind of high level of production would be difficult.
Yeah, and corruption. That's the biggest problem the Venezuelans are facing, according to the analysts, is corruption.
Yeah. So give us some hope, Milena. Don't leave this on a down note.
That that the Venezuelans and other countries are prospering. Hopefully the situation in Colombia will improve for the low income residents if our economy improves. But the Venezuelans that arrived in the first wave are happy to be in Colombia. They're doing well. And that's also true in the United States and in Madrid, Spain, and in some of the countries in Central America. So that's the optimistic tone. But we hope this happiness will trickle down to the working class, which are the ones that have been more affected by the coronavirus and by the difficult challenges in life. But let's hope that the economies are able to pick up and that they will be able to find a dignified life wherever they are.
Yeah. Well, maybe if there's a new administration in Washington, maybe there'll be room for some immigration to the US too.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll open the doors. If you're aware that the Venezuelan community in Florida has been supporting Trump.
I know.
They're big believers of the Trump, of the second Trump government, because Trump has been generous and invited Guaido to the White House, and they've had very cordial relationships with the Trump government. So we'll have to see what happens next, but hopefully.
Cuba too, Cubans too. Is that right, Jeremy? Is that your sense? The Cuban community in Florida is going with Trump?
Yeah, I think I'm Cuban. I'm born and raised in Miami, and I can speak to obviously the Cuban support for Trump, but also Venezuelans in the West.
And Colombians, unfortunately, too.
Yeah, it's really interesting dynamic.
Crazy, right?
They believe, the Colombians, the Venezuelans, and the Cubans, that Biden will bring socialism to America. So it's just pretty scary that they think that way. And even in Colombia, politicians have been accused of supporting Trump. So it's crazy.
If socialism means quality education, quality healthcare, affordable housing, and a livable wage, I hope they do. Socialism would be good for all of us.
Yeah.
If that's what you call socialism.
But they see socialism as a Chavez regime in the U.S. They're nuts. They're crazy.
I know. That's why I've always been in education. As you know, I come from a very poor family. Ignorance is half of the danger here. What they don't want is dictatorship. Dictatorship is different than socialism. They're entirely different. So I don't know. People are crazy, right? So we'll see. Florida's going to be key. If Florida will, I think, we'll know who won Florida on Tuesday night by midnight. And if Biden wins Florida, the election's over. Biden's won. There's no chance that Trump can win. But will that happen? That's a very open question. Unfortunately, my own projection, I think, is Trump will take Florida, but he will lose the election. But we may not know that for a week or 2 weeks, because Pennsylvania and Arizona, they cannot start counting ballots, even early ballots, till election day. So it's unlikely that we'll get final results from Pennsylvania or Arizona until, a week from the election, if not longer, which then opens the possibility for all the trouble that many people fear and expect, and lawsuits and everything else. But on the good news, we had the same kind of disputes in 2000, and it may not have been the best outcome, but it all was settled peacefully and the world went on. So I don't think there's going to be unrest. I just think there's going to be chaos if the election isn't called within a couple of weeks. We'll see. Say your prayers.
So we're leaving it on an optimist note, Bill.
Well, the optimist note is Biden is going to win. You heard it here. He is going to win. The question is, does he win just by 10 or 15 electoral votes, or does he win by 100? It is possible. It is possible if you look at the numbers. He could, I'm not saying he will, but he could win by a landslide. But I'm thinking it's going to be, I want to leave you on an optimistic note. I have to tell you that one of my models comes out, get this, 268 to 268, a tie. So it could be, it's possible to have a tie. And then it goes to the House of Representatives, where each state gets one vote, 50 votes. That is, California gets the same number of votes as Rhode Island. So go count your states and see where it comes out, but we'll see. Only 10% chance of that. Leave us on a happy note, Milena.
That it's great to be with you guys.
The same.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And
Great presentation.
So Jeremy, I'll flip it back to you. You're the master of ceremonies.
Sure. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Milena, for your great presentation. A lot of interesting questions and points on a very complex topic. Just a quick heads up. I mean, we have these every week, so obviously join our Food for Thoughts. For current students, if you want to, or if you're not a current student, you want to join us anyway, we're having an election watch night party on election night from 7:30 to 8:30. See like the initial results come in. If you want to join us, let me know. And if you haven't completed the survey, please complete it. It's really useful for us. But thank you everyone for joining, and